Has there ever been a game so simultaneously beloved and despised as Chrono Cross? It stands in the long shadow of its older brother, Chrono Trigger, to be forever cursed with comparisons to one of the most iconic RPGs of all time. These negative opinions of Cross haven't formed over time as a result of its objective quality necessarily, but because it's so different. If you didn't know any better, you'd think Cross was resentful of its own Chrono lineage. The battle system, art style, characters, and world of Cross didn't represent a linear uptick in quality, but a lateral move to something totally different, like stepping into another dimension where the choices that Square never made for Trigger sat around waiting for their chance to become a full game. In a 2000 interview, GamePro spoke to Hiromichi Tanaka, producer of classics such as Xenogears, Secret of Mana, and of course, Chrono Cross. He was asked if the team found Cross's distance from Trigger to be problematic. He responded, "Chrono Cross is not a sequel to Chrono Trigger, so I'm not worried. Of course the fans of the original are very important, but what innovation can come when you're bound to the past? I believe that gameplay should evolve with hardware." It's worth keeping this quote in mind as we proceed. The release of Cross begs that long-standing question. Can the follow-up to a beloved game be a great game without being a great sequel? And does that follow-up have a responsibility to its predecessor? If I asked the waiter to bring me another order of breadsticks and he showed up with a strawberry shortcake, would I have the right to be upset?
This strawberry shortcake is the superior option.
Listen, pal, it says right here, bottomless breadsticks. I'm in the mood for 3,500 calories of bread, not cake. There are going to be a lot of differing opinions on these questions, and I'm not here to answer them. I'm here to take a look at the beloved yet contentious game known as Chrono Cross. And with the Radical Dreamers edition out, I'll be offering up my opinion on the technical aspects of the remaster as well. If you are not okay with spoilers, stop watching right now. That, or you can just skip to the technical review at the end, which I'll timestamp in the video. It's impossible to talk about Cross at length without getting into spoilers a bit, so that's what's going to be happening here. If you just want to avoid major spoilers, I will give another warning in the video before I get to those. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy this big old review of Chrono Cross Radical Dreamers Edition. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 more times. Chrono Cross has got one of the greatest first acts in video game history. Who are these people? Who's Lynx and why are we after him? What is this castle? Why are there robots? What's this thing do? Why is this door so big? Why'd I kill that girl? What the devil is going on here? Now this is an intro. I feel like I was just dropped halfway into the story. No amnesia, my character isn't an orphan, I don't have to waste time collecting 3 squint feathers for the village maiden, just straight into the action. That is, until you wake up and have to collect 3 squint feathers for the village maiden. Alright, my mellow is mildly harsh by the realization that the intro was just a dream, but still, what a great setup. That has to be a premonition. You're woken up by your mom. Yeah, just mom. Dad died in a mysterious boating accident many years ago. Is this the Truman Show? Arnie Village is the first real area of the game, and it absolutely sets the stage for the adventures to come. Arnie is jam-packed with people to talk to and secrets to uncover. The tropical motif is warm and inviting, and also kind of unusual for this type of game. There are a few tutorials that you can opt out of altogether if you already know what you're doing, which is much appreciated. This opening area truly establishes a sense of community with our protagonist, Serge, and the townsfolk. They all have an affinity towards you, some have fishing stories for you, others share hopes and dreams with you, some people lament the choices they've made and wonder how their lives could have been different. However, Serge is a silent protagonist, so he is literally just standing there as they wax philosophical, which is much how I react in real life as well. If you're shrewd, you'll find out how to recruit your first companion, a giant pink and white dog named Poshel that speaks English and has a lateral lisp. Chrono Cross is a weird game. There's a lot of comic relief and absurdity. Thankfully, the game avoids pop culture references. Largely. So it doesn't age itself the way Fallout 2 does. But the game is rife with fourth wall breaks and silly dialogue. If this type of thing bothers you, you'll never make it all the way through. Personally, I'm cool with it. As mentioned, we're set on a bit of a collection quest for Serge's totally not girlfriend Lena, which serves to teach us the ropes a bit. These first areas are all relatively stress-free, introducing you to concepts like navigation, equipping magic spells known as elements, and the combat system, which I will talk about in much greater length later on. This ain't just a walk around and fight enemies area either. You have to take an active role in using the environment to catch these 3 lizards needed to progress. It isn't long before the game thrusts you back into the intrigue though. Some kind of crazy magic surrounds Serge, who passes out on the beach. When he wakes up, you travel back through the previous area. Huh, I don't remember those guys. The tables have turned. Was there a chest here before? Very strange, but stranger yet when you arrive back at the village to find everything slightly different. The layout has changed, the music is different, and the townsfolk don't remember you. Mom's not home. You explain your situation to Lena, who is disgusted that you'd impersonate Serge considering he died 8 years ago. Alright Square, you lost me with the squint feathers, but I'm back on board. I love the way we seamlessly shift to another dimension. It's totally unclear what's even happening until you arrive back at the village and see everything's changed. Serge visits his own grave before being accosted by ghost hunters who have orders to apprehend him. This is when Kid, who you may recognize from Serge's dream, comes to his aid. Here you fight Karsh, who plays an active role throughout the story, as well as Solt and Pepor. Yes, I said what I said. These two act as whatever the opposite of sorely needed is, comic relief, as well as explaining some of the intricacies of the battle system. And to give you an idea of how complicated this battle system can get, they'll be showing up and explaining things to you 10 hours into this game. With no other leads, Serge pursues his attackers to Viper Manor, which just so happens to be where Kid is heading. Seems like she has some interest in a character named Lynx, and she's also after a treasure called the Frozen Flame. It's worth mentioning here that you can actually tell Kid you're not interested in traveling with her, in which case Lena will join you instead. Ultimately, Kid will still join you anyway, but it's kinda cool that they give you the option. You go through Fossil Valley, which is supposedly having a ghost problem at the time. But I understand why you feel that way. However, there is a giant walking voodoo doll standing next to you. Therefore, I think it's time to reconsider your stance on the supernatural. Oh yeah, right, the voodoo doll, Mojo, can be recruited as well. A fisherman in Serge's home village gives him a shark tooth memento. The alternative version of this fisherman is actually a deadbeat who lives in his mom's basement, worshipping an idol named Mojo. Showing him the shark tooth causes him to briefly reconsider his life choices, at which point Mojo comes to life and starts telling him what an idiot he is and tags along with you. Also, Mojo's name in Japanese is Lucky Dan, which is wonderful. At this point, you're given 3 distinct options for how to proceed. You can team up with the masked magician Guile, who's looking for a particular item. If you go with him, you have to scale the cliffs behind Viper Manor. The way is treacherous and there's a tough early game boss, but Guile is a strong magic-focused character for the early game. You can find J-Rock superstar Nikki, who wants into the manor for personal reasons, and trudge through the sewers to get there. It's a more time-consuming but less difficult route, and Nikki is a pretty decent character. Finally, you can recruit Pierre and just smash through the front gates. It's the quickest and easiest way in, but Pierre is Pierre. You also fight a guy named Ketchup who yells sauce when he attacks. What this whole section demonstrates is that A, there's an element of player choice present in Chrono Cross that is lacking in most Japanese RPGs, and B, there is a shitload of characters in this game, and some are pretty easy to miss. It's been maybe 3 hours, and so far we have a lot of very pressing questions about the nature of our situation, a great setup for our villain, Lynx, an introduction to the broader world outside of our village. We've been given a pretty significant choice, and now we're in the midst of a heist mission. Chrono Cross does not waste a minute of time in its first act, and unfortunately the game does not keep this pace up for its runtime. To be fair, it can't. It's impossible. This is a 40-hour-long RPG, it's unreasonable to expect such a thing. The hook is a success though, no question about it. If the rest of the story is half as compelling as this intro, I'll walk away a happy man. Will I walk away a happy man? Find out sometime later! Meanwhile, I want to talk a little bit about the game's presentation because it's so front and center. Chrono Cross uses pre-rendered backgrounds with fixed camera angles for exploration, while battles are handled in fully 3D environments. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that this was one of the most beautiful games in the PSX library. There is an extremely vibrant color palette used that makes all of these lush, dense environments pop off the screen in a way that not many games of this period could. Now, this is an updated version of the game you're seeing, and as to the degree of its success in cleaning up the original, you'll just have to wait until the end when I talk about the technical parts, but the bones of Chrono Cross are here regardless. Each environment has a unique look and feel, with layers upon layers of visual detail without ever getting too cluttered or noisy. You can see the variety just going from Arnie Village, which has all of these intense, vibrant colors, to Termina, which is a city of whitewashed buildings reminiscent of the Greek Isles. The layout changes as well, with Arnie's ramshackle structures kind of haphazardly placed in the environment, while Termina's buildings are placed methodically in the grid-based layout you'd expect from a city. These are just two examples. From beginning to end, this game is packed with areas that feel totally distinct from one another, each offering up a very different atmosphere. One of my favorites is the Isle of the Damned, where some people died while they were so angry that their anger persisted and warped the entire island into a demon's spawning ground.
That is the most metal thing I ever heard in my whole life.
I feel like the music needs no introduction, but in case you're not familiar, even the staunchest Chrono Trigger fan has to admit that Cross has got an amazing soundtrack. The soundtrack was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, and it's still his magnum opus in my opinion. There aren't any real analog instruments involved, rather the entire soundtrack is composed using the PS1's internal synthesizer, which makes it all the more impressive if you ask me. There's almost nothing I can say that does this soundtrack justice, but I'm gonna try my best. Like the visuals, each area of the game is given its own musical characteristics. The music of Lizard Rock, for instance, is playful and upbeat. Xylophones, guitar, and flute compete with each other to see who can have the most fun. The theme of Termina, however, isn't one of childlike happiness, but the joy of festival and tradition. Bagpipes, castanets, and the jaw harp provide an unexpectedly pleasant basis for a melody that brings to mind the kind of beer-swilling, memory-sharing good times that can only happen once a year, lest they cease to be special. There are only a few weak points here. First of all, a few songs use these fake choir and fake guitar samples. They've both aged pretty badly, but those are the only two instruments that are immediately identifiable as fake. There's one more problem I have with the Chrono Cross soundtrack, but first, a word. Composing a good Japanese RPG battle track requires a tremendous sense of balance. Yeah, if you've played Chrono Cross, you might know where I'm going with this, but bear with me. No track in the game is going to be heard quite so much as the battle theme, which means it needs a variety of characteristics. It needs backbone, it needs to assert itself with a message of danger, but not to an extreme degree. Existential danger should be saved for your major boss themes. The battle music of an RPG should inform you as a player that if you keep your chin up, victory will be yours, but don't get too sloppy. It has to take center stage and pump you up, but it can't be too assertive. If you're going to hear a song 10,000 times before the game ends, it needs to be able to comfortably sit in the background of the action. Its presence isn't something you should always be consciously aware of, but rather a complementary buttress to the action unfolding on screen. The choosing of battle commands, the sounds of sword swiping, and the music should all melt together into an experience where each piece is inseparable from the whole. This is the Chrono Cross battle theme. Okay, so it's not a bad song by any measure. In fact, it would be the perfect track to induce anxiety, uncertainty, and dread in a particular situation. In fact, Radical Dreamers use this exact composition for that purpose. The trippy 9/8 time signature along with the violins screeching and organs wailing on unresolved block chords make the song creepy and tense as hell. What the song doesn't do is gently set the tone of battle 10,000 times. There are times where I hold my breath trying to squeak by enemies without getting into a fight, just because I associate those opening notes with the feeling of being pissed. On a less sour note, the boss theme is one of the greatest of all time, and just says, you better get your ass ready, something spooky this way comes, in a way that nothing else I've heard does. I remember listening to this track many years ago. My mom overheard it and said, "This sounds like a scene from a James Bond movie where he's running on top of a train." So that's all I can associate with it now. So during the events of the Viper Manor heist, Kid is poisoned, and she can only be cured with an antidote synthesized from the fluid of a creature known as the Hydra. The catch? The substance is so valuable that the Hydras were hunted to extinction years ago. This presents us with another major choice. Do we embark on a seemingly hopeless mission to find the Hydra humor and save Kid? Or do we focus on our own problems? If you're not an asshole, you may opt for the former, but I'm here to tell you that's the wrong choice.
Yeah, it hurts to miss that one.
Yeah.
See, neither of these options changes anything major in the story. Kid is fine either way. The only difference is that if you do the decent thing and choose to save her, you miss out on one of the best characters in the game, both in terms of stats and the quality of his content. I knew this going in, but still chose to be a good guy just because I feel like this is probably what Serge would do in the situation. So instead of getting Glenn, I get Korcha. Korcha is supposed to be a lovable mischief maker, but comes across as one of the most insufferable characters in the whole game. Not a fan of his design either, and his posterior pelvic tilt will result in crippling lower back pain later in life. Beyond the lack of meaningful consequences, the Save Kid side quest represents a major positive and a major negative. So let's start with the bad news. This is the last decision you'll make in the game, outside of organically choosing whether or not to do some side content. Maybe it's my fault, but I feel that front-loading the game with so many choices kind of presents the story under a false pretense. The good news is that hunting the Hydra requires the player to shift from another world back to homeworld for the first time. That's right, we can shift dimensions by returning to the beach from the beginning now. See, it's only in this alternate dimension where Hydras have become extinct. In the homeworld, they're still kicking, albeit not many. The reason I count this as such a positive is because it opens up a great deal of potential in Cross's storytelling. Finding solutions to one world's insurmountable problems in the other world is a recurring theme throughout the game. It's always interesting to hop between worlds just to see how different a location might be. For instance, Termina is a jovial, festive city full of color and character in another world. In the homeworld, it's been conquered by the poor military. You might remember poor if you've played Trigger. They're powered by beef jerky. As such, the city is under martial law. The reason Poor was able to successfully seize the city is very much intertwined with later events of the story. It's interesting to see how small differences between worlds can result in such tangible changes. Like how in Homeworld there's a casino cruise ship called the SS Zelbess, owned by an unscrupulous and also depressed Captain Fargo. In another world, Fargo is fierce, idealistic, and energetic. His ship is the SS Invincible, a pirate vessel that's boarded by a crew of pirate ghosts! And a big congratulations to everyone who had Ghost Pirates on their Chrono Cross bingo card. You may now scratch that one off. My minuscule mind can scarcely conceive of hell, but I imagine it's something like playing through this ghost ship section for all eternity. Most of the dungeons in this game are pretty decent. There's a good mix of light puzzle solving, exploration, and combat, but then there are areas like the ghost ship.
Scooby-Doo, where are you?
The only word I can think of to describe this is slog. It's just fight after fight after fight as you look for the one guy who has a key to the right door, and then you fight some more.
Ever since I was a boy, all I knew was how to fight. Fight, fight, fight. And when I got tired, I would fight some more.
Okay, I guess this is a good time to bring up the combat system. So the fighting in this game is really unconventional, but I'll try to briefly describe how it works. So each character has 7 points of stamina when they start a fight. That's a full bar. When it's your team's turn, you can send any one of your characters to battle. When you attack, you can choose to spend up to 3 stamina points. The higher the point value of an attack, the stronger but also the less accurate your attack will be. Magic, skills, and items are under one catch-all command called elements. In order to use an element, you must first successfully land attacks on enemies with a stamina value corresponding to the level of the element you want to use. Once you've built up enough element levels, you can use it at any point on your turn, but regardless of when you do, using an element will drain 7 stamina points. This means that if you use the spell on a full bar, you'll be left with 0 points. If you use the spell with just 1 stamina point, you'll be left with -6 points, which makes that character a sitting duck until their stamina refills. An element can also only be used once per battle, so you have to be prudent about casting your more powerful spells. Also, there's 3 circles at the top of the screen that represent the field effect. That's the elemental affinity of the last 3 spells cast in battle. Oh right, every character has an innate element. White is light, black is darkness and gravity, red is fire, blue is water and ice, green is wind and nature, yellow is earth and electricity. But this isn't like your standard RPG where blue beats red beats green beats blue, etc. No, in this game, elements go blow for blow against each other. Fire beats water beats fire. In order to have an advantage, you must also need to be at an inherent disadvantage, so the field effect makes the element which is most represented in the circles the current strongest element in the battle. If it's all green spells kick ass. If it's all yellow spells kick ass. I'm colorblind, so the green and yellow in this case look identical to me, meaning that neither of them ever kicked ass at any point in my playthrough. Did you catch all that? No? Good. So here are the ways in which this battle system works. There are no level ups. That's right, fighting enemies does not net you experience points. Rather, your character powers up only after beating a boss, so you don't have to worry about grinding, and the game is balanced around this. The field effect system makes for an interesting tug of war where you always have to consciously adapt your strategy. If you forget about it, the enemy could turn the entire thing against you and become ludicrously strong. Also, having elements be slottable items rather than spells which are learned means you can feel free to equip anyone in your party however you see fit. Elements are shared treasures rather than specialized, so characters can be Swiss Army knives. And finally, this is a big one, you can run from any fight in the game, including the final boss. If you're getting your ass kicked, you can just leave and the boss will casually wait for you to take a drink of water and come back. I love this. I wish more games did that. Now here are the ways in which the battle system doesn't work. There are no level ups. Yeah, I know I said that was a positive, but the downside is that all of these fights kind of feel fruitless. When you're in an area like a ghost ship, the least they could do is give you some experience points, but here you're just fighting to progress with no real motivation. Also, balancing the game around a lack of level ups means that no enemy ever really poses a significant threat. You can be confident that whoever you come across can be beaten, which I guess can be a good thing if you're in it just for the story. In practice, this means this intricate combat system never rises to its full potential. There are so few opportunities to be strategic and methodical because most fights can just kind of be beaten by not playing like a complete idiot. There are a few exceptions to this rule, and those are coincidentally the best fights in the game, at least in my opinion, but for the most part, you never really feel like you're being tested by a boss. Some of the late game enemies do so little damage, the balancing almost seems like an oversight. And finally, allocating elements can be a chore if you switch characters often like I do. Having to unequip and re-equip characters repeatedly becomes so tiring. Thankfully, the game does have an auto-allocate button, however, it will make some questionable decisions. So the combat system is Chrono Trigger Departure number 1. Trigger allows you to choose between a wait for me to finish my turn system and an active time battle system, which seems to be the intended way to play. Your characters and the enemies move throughout the battlefield, and certain spells are meant to target in a specific pattern, such as anyone close by or anybody in a straight line. This means that being aware of positioning and taking advantage of opportunities is a major factor in Trigger's battle system. Because Trigger only has 8 playable characters, each has an attention and focus placed on their moveset that Cross lacks. Any combination of 2 or 3 characters can use a specific dual or triple technique in battle, which creates a dynamic in which the player is rewarded for investing in a specific team. The system in Cross is different. Very, very different. My opinion? They actually kinda stuck the landing. Doing something completely different was risky and frankly unnecessary, considering how elegant, simple, and beloved Trigger's system was, but they actually did a respectable job moving to something more slow-paced and methodical. The biggest problem here is the lack of challenge, which means its system is never stress-tested the way that Trigger's is in some of its tougher boss battles. So back on Mount Pyre, we battle Solt and Pepor again, as well as the 3 Dragoon Divas. The Divas have worked as our de facto rivals up to this point, not explicitly hating us, but under orders to take us down. Except for Marcy, who spends the entire fight telling Serge how much she hates him. There's also Karsh, the ghost hunter from earlier, as well as Zoa, who you may recognize from Mad Max 2. After mercilessly beating up a child, you enter Fort Dragonia in pursuit of Lynx. Fort Dragonia is the most dungeony dungeon in the game. and by that I mean there are multiple bosses, puzzles to solve, and many treasures. The puzzles never get too complex, but you do have to use your brain a little bit, and even that goes a long way in these Japanese RPGs where things can get repetitive. One thing that kind of bothers me is the in-universe consistency at this point, at least in terms of these bosses. Okay, it makes sense that I'm fighting these guys, but what about this? Or this? Or these? Oh, dear sweet God, what is this? Final Fantasy VII had some interesting monsters, but at least they attempted to give an in-universe explanation. The people of this world think ghosts are preposterous, but this is fine. The least I can say is that these fights are animated well. With the bosses and really the enemies in general, there's a lot of variety. A lot of these types of games resort to recoloring old enemies and slapping more health on them, but Cross is always upping the ante with its enemies. So after activating all these dragon statues and taking the elevator up, the hype truly begins because now you're reliving your dream from the beginning. I really like this setup. You may have altogether forgotten about that intro section, but now you're brought right back with everything contextualized. It's not identical though. The dialogue doesn't play out in the same way, and a different character was with me. Also, the fort was filled with different enemies and a different music track was playing, but I like that because that's how dreams are. Little details are missing or completely different. So Serge heads up to confront Lynx with the knowledge that he may kill Kid for one reason or another. Obviously, this is a spoiler, so you may want to avert your innocent gaze, but if you've made it here, that probably doesn't bother you. So we battle Lynx, but before he's defeated, he activates a magical device that causes Serge to pass out. When he wakes up, he starts talking? But Serge is a bona fide silent protagonist, so I'm shocked. Shocked, I say.
Well, not that shocked.
The game won't continue until you move, so you take a step towards Lynx and... Huh? Lynx has body swapped with Serge, and a bloodthirsty Kid doesn't know any better. Your ass is summarily kicked, Serge wakes up in a dimensional distortion, and you have to make your way through this MC Escher nightmare. Afterwards, you're dropped into Hydra Marsh. You might notice that all of your companions are gone. Instead of Kid, you have Harl, whose motives are still shrouded in mystery. On one hand, she appears to be Lynx's right-hand woman. On the other, she seems to have an affinity for Serge. She knows it's you in his body and still decides to help you, though she spends much of the game being very cryptic. It's interesting to experience this world from the perspective of Lynx's body. In Chrono Cross, there's a race broadly known as demi-humans, who are half animal or half monster, of which Lynx is considered one. The humans of this world aren't big fans of demi-humans. The reactions to Lynx range from fearful to angry and occasionally empathetic. The only sanctuary for demi-humans is an island called Marbule, at least in another world. In this home world, which you're now marooned in as Serge's body is required to hop dimensions, Marbule has been infested with ethereal monsters, and its residents are forced to work slave labor aboard the SS Zelbess. Our only lead is a sage aboard the Zelbess, who is said to have some answers for us. At this point, it's kind of refreshing to have offloaded all of my party members. I'm working with a blank slate here. Yeah, I guess it's time to talk about Chrono Trigger Departure Number 2, the characters. In Chrono Trigger, there are 8 characters. This is a pretty standard number for RPGs of this type. Usually you'll get from 6 to 10, depending on the length of the game. Chrono Cross has 45. 45 playable characters. First of all, variety is nice. Chrono Cross presents a lot of opportunities to recruit new characters. In fact, every time you speak to somebody with a portrait, there's a good chance you can find a way to recruit them. It can be fun to rack your brain figuring out how to get someone on your team. You're constantly drip-fed new characters, which gives this game a collectible, almost Pokemon kind of angle. Each character uses their own weapon type and has their own innate element type, as well as a set of stats that could favor strength, agility, etc. So choose your playstyle and pick your favorites. Because the game is quite easy, you never have to worry about optimizing your team to its fullest ability outside of a few tough encounters. That's my preferred way to play, switching out characters often. Every character has their own accent or speech pattern, and I have to give special commendation to Richard Honeywood, who directed the localization for Chrono Cross. Not only did he manage to translate the personality, humor, and prose of these characters very well, but he himself programmed a script that filters dialogue and applies an accent to certain words. This means that any of the 45 characters can contribute dialogue with their own flair, and it makes for some hilarious moments. Every one of these characters has a backstory, and while many of them are somewhat bare bones, a few of them have legitimately tragic or enthralling stories to seek out. Each character has 3 techniques that only they can use, and it's a blast to play them all and see what they look like. There's so much detail and character in these animations. Often their third and final techniques can only be learned by completing a short sub-story related to their own past. It's always a treat to find some easily missed dialogue that expands on a character, and if you have a hunch that something might pique the interest of a particular character, you'll often be vindicated if you come back with that character. Since both dimensions have their own version of each person, you can take characters to meet each other for some amusing dialogue. Now for the major, obvious problem with having 45 characters. There isn't enough playtime in a single game to expand on 45 meaningful characters. I don't think 9 seasons of an HBO show would be enough time. For the purpose of demonstration, I think you can break down the characters of Chrono Cross into 3 major types. The first type would be the main cast. This might look a little weird if you've played the game, but bear with me. These are characters that serve enough of a purpose in the main story, or could conceivably serve enough of one if they were expanded on, that if the main cast were culled down to 8 characters, it would make sense if these were included. Surge and Kid are no-brainers. Karsh primarily works against you for the first part of the game, but joins you about halfway in after your goals align. I think that dynamic is interesting enough to expand upon. He also has one of the more in-depth backstories of all characters. Glenn has a lot of direct links to major characters in the first half of the game, and a vested interest in many important plot points throughout. He's also kind of an heir apparent to Frog from Chrono Trigger. Harl is Lynx's enigmatic accomplice. Her motives are mysterious enough that you do want to know more about her, and she serves a surprisingly major role in the story later on. Then there's Guile. He's an optional character and mostly present during the Viper Manor heist, but he was originally intended to be Magus from Chrono Trigger after a memory wipe. This was confirmed with an extended cut of Chrono Trigger's ending. This gives him a significance that, if expanded upon, could serve a helpful role in tying Cross to Trigger, which is a feat the game tries messily to accomplish with expository dialogue. Fargo is expanded upon more than just about any other character. He's driven toward a sense of idealism in uniting humans and demi-humans. I think this is a believable reason for his joining Surge, since healing division is a central theme in Chrono Cross. Finally, there's Starkey. Yeah, okay, kind of a weird choice, I guess, but think of it this way. Most RPGs have at least one oddball character, and Starkey technically serves a very important role in the story, retrofitting Surge's boat with his spaceship engine. The next category of characters is the gimmick. For our purposes, this represents any character whose most noteworthy characteristic is either their appearance, whether they be cute or just unusual, or have a unique gameplay mechanic. Sprig, for instance, can transform into any monster you've encountered, and Pip can evolve depending on how you play the game. These characters aren't necessarily useless, but their sole purpose for existing is adding visual variety to your rat pack. The last and most populous category is the redundants. Again, I'm not saying these characters aren't useful in battle. Many of them are my favorites. The qualification here is, could you comfortably fit into the story as an NPC? Are there other characters who play just like you? Norris, Zoa, Viper, Poshel, and Fungi are all yellow innate, high-strength characters. Some of them serve a purpose in moving the story along in places, but not really enough to justify including them in the party. Many argue that Cross would have been a better game if they just cut out the superfluous characters and focused on making a small handful of really tightly written character stories. After all, that's what Chrono Trigger did. Trigger's story is very much driven by its characters, who are all practically bursting with personality. But why does it feel that way? Why do they feel so colorful and special while Cross's cast feels kinda stiff? It comes down to a few things, but the biggest problem here is just the writing. Trigger's 8 characters are written with a specific intent. Each one contributes to the story in a unique and meaningful way. When they're spoken to, they respond not just with a cartoonish accent or speech impediment, but with their own disposition. You can even see it in their character design. Human beings communicate our feelings on our faces, and Robo is brimming with personality despite not even having one. His analytical nature taken to its logical extreme has given him a childlike curiosity. He doesn't fully understand human emotion, but he's determined to try. It breaks his heart when his robot brothers consider him defective, but even on death's door, he won't resort to violence. He doesn't have much in this world, and what little he's found is priceless treasure to him. Grobik is a robot too. He joins Surge because Surge beats him, and he can use a laser cannon, and that's pretty cool. Now, let's be fair, there are exceptions. Kid's character is very well done. She's a brash hothead with a penchant for violence, but as you go through the story, you'll see cracks in her guise, culminating in one of the best scenes in the game. Karsh, Fargo, and Glenn all start as somewhat two-dimensional, but are expanded on in a satisfying way. Many of the best scenes that delve into these characters are easily missable side quests, not unlike those in Chrono Trigger. Ultimately though, it's just not comparable. The cast of Trigger are friends. You want to see the game to its conclusion, not just because you care about the fate of their world, but because you care about them as people, and their relationships to each other. I feel that Cross has a compelling story, though some might disagree, but it's a story driven by the desire to solve mysteries, explore the unknown, and make sense of the nonsensical. Don't get me wrong, Draggy is a little cutie, but I will not defeat abstract concepts such as time or God in order to protect him. At the end of the day, like everything else, this is just going to be a matter of preference. There's no doubt that collecting a ton of characters is just fun. Seeing them interact in various ways, introducing them to their doubles, traveling around with your favorites, and seeing their crazy animations is a blast. But they lack significance, and that's very important in a Japanese RPG. Swapping fireside stories, hearing silly banter, acting as foils for each other's personalities, these are the glue that hold JRPGs together. I understand it's important to save the world, but you've also got to create a world that's worth saving. Okay, so where were we? Oh yes, that's right. So you have a boat in both the home world and another world now. You can cruise around the world map called the El Nido Archipelago and visit the islands. You can find cool stuff in some of them, like new elements or side quests to start. As of right now, there's still 2 inaccessible places. A jungle housed inside of a massive crater called Gaia's Navel, and an area called the Dead Sea. The Sage of Marbule has directed us toward the Dead Sea to get Surge's body back, and I love the mystery surrounding this area. In Homeworld, the Dead Sea is actually known as the Sea of Eden. In both cases, the area is said to be cursed, and no living man has been known to make it in. I love things like this. It always makes my imagination run wild with possibilities, like going for a hike in pristine wilderness. Who knows what you'll find? Bigfoot? Treasure? An obelisk containing arcane knowledge beyond my wildest dreams? The entry to the Dead Sea is blocked by the Masamune, thrust into the floor of this cave. You might remember the Masamune from Chrono Trigger. Well, now it's been corrupted and can only be countered by finding its sister sword, known as the Einlanzer. This leads to one of the cooler boss fights in the game. I have to say, the Dead Sea is excellent. Walking through here is a haunting image, seeing these massive waves frozen in time. The storm clouds moving overhead is a great touch, and the shadow of some massive structure looms in the background. You travel these dilapidated highways. Structures are all crumbling and melting into each other. Do people know this place is a 5-minute bike ride from my fishing village? You stumble across a computer that not only indicates the year is 2300 AD when we thought it was 1020, but whoever was here before was aware of Lavos, the parasitic alien from Chrono Trigger. The mall area here is one of my favorites as well, at least visually. In Chrono Trigger we explored 2300 AD too, but it was completely apocalyptic. In Cross, this building is held together enough to get a sense of what pre-Lavos life was like in the future. We reach the top of the building and what follows is probably the most beautiful scene in the game. First of all, that's not what this landscape looked like about 3 minutes ago, but more importantly, this is a powerful visual. We're surrounded by ghosts of the characters from Trigger, and one of the best music tracks in the game accompanies this image of Lean's bell, a symbol of safety in Chrono Trigger in a state of disrepair. This guy who looks like Viper Manor's gardener steps out and gives us a plot dump. Remember how Surge's father, Wazuki, died at sea? It turns out that Surge was actually on the boat with him. Surge had been attacked by a panther demon, and his wounds were so serious they had to set sail on the night of a storm to find help. With him was Lena's father, Miguel. They stumbled across a facility in the Dead Sea. Surge and his father were allowed in, but Miguel was imprisoned, which is why he's been stuck in the Dead Sea for 14 years. Something strange happened in that facility, because Wazuki was forever a changed man. Apparently this has given him a lot of time to think and forget about his social graces, because instead of answering my many burning questions, he waxes philosophical for 5 minutes and then starts fighting Surge. If I wanted to hear someone drone on about a bunch of nerd shit and then threaten to beat somebody up, I'd just listen to a political YouTube debate.
I'd be able to say, well, the United States has this thing. You would need some sort of like external European Union body or UN body or somebody looking into something. So for Russia, that's trying to justify a unilateral invasion of a country, to say that like, well, they're...
The battle with Miguel is actually one of the hardest in the game. I think it's the only time I died from unpreparedness. He has some brutal attacks, but with a little bit of luck you can squeak by relatively unscathed. After being ruthlessly beaten by a gang of teenagers, Miguel briefly recaps the story of Trigger before explaining that somehow Surge's very existence threatens to undo the hard work of the cast of that game. Something he refers to as fate begins to destroy the entire Dead Sea. If this is starting to sound convoluted or confusing, I have to warn you that we're really only scratching the surface. Anyway, Surge and Co. are rescued by a dragon. There are 6 dragon gods that inhabit the El Nido archipelago, one for each element. It seems our new destination is the Sea of Eden, which is Homeworld's version of Dead Sea. That means we can travel between dimensions again. Hooray! It seems that Lynx in Surge's body has been causing some shenanigans back at Homeworld because everyone is terrified of him. While Lynx has been wreaking havoc, Por has moved in and seized control of Termina. I just happen to have Norris, a soldier of Por's military, in my party when learning of this. Karsh confronts him and Norris explains that he's disturbed by his own military's methods. I appreciate these little bits of context. It's easily missable, but it's nice to have a brief explanation for why these two opposing factions are working together. You can pick between Karsh and Zoa here, and though Karsh is a fan favorite, I go with Zoa because his character design is so absurd and I like the way he yells everything. That helmet must be echoey, man.
One of us will. Ah!
Shortly after this, we begin the only quote-unquote fetch quest in Chrono Cross. In order to get our body back, we have to earn the blessing of each dragon god, which means defeating them in combat. The dragons occupy different islands across both worlds. Sometimes it's pretty obvious where they are, such as in the case of Water Dragon Isle or Earth Dragon Isle, but other times you'll have to get pretty creative when navigating. Remember when I mentioned Gaia's navel? That's where the green dragon is. To get there, you need to use a flute to call a creature called a wingipede. You gotta use it in the right spot, where it'll pick you up and airdrop you in the area. The dragon designs are absolutely outstanding. Each one feels totally unique and appropriate for their personality and area. The Sky Dragon is this majestic 4-winged beast, and he's very polite. The Water Dragon is this massive amphibious creature, somewhere between a frog and a catfish. The Earth Dragon is this giant snake-like creature with these slug-like eyes and insectoid feelers. My favorites are the Red Dragon, who starts out looking like a Scottish Terrier with a stick, but then expands his glutes and becomes a Giga Chad. And I'm also really fond of the Green Dragon. Gaia's navel is this prehistoric area, totally cut off from the world, and the Green Dragon's design reflects that. He looks only halfway evolved, with these spindly limbs, baleen-like teeth, and these bony protrusions that serve as wings. It's very creepy, and I love how upfront he is about the fact that he just wants to eat you. Finally, there's the Black Dragon, which is kind of an odd case. You can actually just walk up to the sleeping dragon and take his relic without a fight, but that's lame. Rather, if you complete a lengthy, optional side quest, you can awaken the dragon and battle him. Remember how Marbule was evacuated because of these ghost-like monsters? Those are nightmares being created by the Black Dragon. By playing the Song of the Demi-Humans, you manifest them into reality and defeat them, thus awakening the Black Dragon and freeing the Demi-Humans from their indentured servitude. It's a lot of work considering the big reward is just another boss fight, but I choose to do it because it just feels right. It's an excellent side quest, and it's a shame that so many people will miss it. So after defeating the 6 dragons, you can enter the Sea of Eden. This might be my favorite moment in the game. I think I may have said that 2 or 3 times at this point, but I really mean it. This area is beautiful. You can't help but wonder what this place even is. This massive prism forms a center island, and you're forced to face off with this bizarre enemy before continuing. The center island lowers and we enter Chronopolis. It is here that Chrono Cross's story well and truly goes off the rails, and it will never recover. However, you do fight Soundwave from Transformers, so it might be the high point of the game. So, Chronopolis. Chronopolis. Are you ready for this? I'm gonna say a whole bunch of stuff, so whatever hope you have of avoiding spoilers is over starting now. Chronopolis is a research institute built by Balthazar, who is a character from Chrono Trigger, in case you didn't know that. The facility served several purposes and housed while simultaneously being powered by a treasure known as the Frozen Flame, which is actually a piece of Lavos, the primary antagonist of Chrono Trigger. Using the energy generated by the flame, Balthazar constructed a supercomputer AI which he called Fate, that was so complex and powerful he didn't even need to install Bonzi Buddy.
I may be the smallest friend you have expanded on, but I will always try and make up for that with my big heart.
Fate somehow discovered that Lavos had actually merged with Shala, a character from Chrono Trigger, resulting in a being known as the Time Devourer. Please do not ask me how Fate figured this out, I'm begging you not to ask questions. So Balthasar decided he needed to stop the Time Devourer, because if not stopped, it is reasonable to assume that it would devour time. So the institution known as Chronopolis attempts to gain control over time itself by interfacing fate with the frozen flame, but it doesn't go so well, pulling Chronopolis back in time to 12,000 BC. But it's all a part of the plan, see, because it would mess up history. The planet itself hurls the city of Dinopolis, yes, the planet itself hurls the city of Dinopolis, which is home to the Reptites in Chrono Trigger, you remember that? Into Chrono Cross's homeworld in order to achieve a balance between technology and dinosaurs, which results in a war between Chronopolis and Dinopolis, with Chronopolis narrowly pulling the lead in the end. So Chronopolis splits the Dragon God. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot to mention. So Dinopolis is powered by a Dragon God, but it's not actually a god. It's a race of cybernetic organisms? Okay, it's a race of cybernetic organisms developed by the Reptites who have big brain in order to power their civilization. So Chronopolis splits the Dragon God into 6 individual entities which become the elemental dragons. Hey, we fought them, do you remember that? I guess Chronopolis only had the ability to split it and not destroy it because, you know man, the thing. So there are a few survivors from Dinopolis that become known as the Dragonians. They go to develop the elements that we all know and love, so all those spells we've been using are actually technology made by dinosaur people. Then they promptly go extinct because I guess they have to for the story to continue. So, as it turns out, are you listening? The El Nido Archipelago is actually an artificial construct terraformed by fate as a paradise for the residents of Chronopolis who are sent into the archipelago with their memories erased.
Excellent.
Remember in the beginning when I said something like, "What is this, the Truman Show?" Dad died in a mysterious boating accident many years ago. Is this the Truman Show? Well, if you had Truman Show on your Chrono Cross bingo card, congratulations, because it's time to scratch that one off. That's a bingo! Those pyramids you've been saving at for the whole game, those are actually computer nodes that connect directly with Fate, and it allows for people to be controlled and directed in ways that Fate deems necessary. You might think those people are dumb for going about their lives, never questioning why they have to periodically touch floating pyramids, but hey man, you didn't either. So El Nido is colonized, and Por from Chrono Trigger absolutely annihilates Guardia from Chrono Trigger. Do you remember that? And it's speculated, although never said outright, that Chrono and Marl from the original are killed by the Por military, which is very depressing and kind of funny considering Por in that game was like 3 houses. You know, speaking of which, let's just call this whole section Chrono Trigger Departure number 3, the final act. Okay, so Surge is attacked by a panther demon as a little kid, which is why he keeps having bad dreams about it. Wazuki and Miguel set sail to find help. We knew this. However, the reason the storm blew them off course is because Shala, hearing Surge's crying through, I guess, space and time, probably, intentionally shut down the power at Chronopolis and blew their boat into the institution so that Wazuki could treat Surge with the frozen flame which healed his wounds and also turned Surge into the Chosen One. What I mean by that is this. A circuit inside of Fate was placed there by Luca. Remember her? She's from Chrono Trigger. She worked with Balthasar on Fate. The Prometheus circuit is actually Robo, remember, from Chrono Trigger, who was placed there as a contingency. When Surge interacted with the frozen flame, the Prometheus circuit overrode Fate's programming and turned Surge into the only person who could ever touch the frozen flame. So Papa Wazuki, he can't handle the frozen flame's power and becomes mind-controlled by Fate and turned into an avatar of Fate who takes the form of Surge's worst fears, a panther demon. Lynx is Surge's father is what I'm trying to say. See, Fate and the workers at Chronopolis are pissed. They like the frozen flame and they want to use it to do things, and by only giving Surge admin access, this throws a wrench in their plans. At this point, our friend Harl approaches Lynx and gets all buddy-buddy with him, convincing him to find Luca so that she can provide tech support and deactivate the Prometheus circuit so that somebody else other than Surge can deal with the frozen flame. You know, kid, she was an orphan. She was raised by Luca, so understandably, when the orphanage is burned down and Luca is killed by Lynx, Kid is pretty upset. But upset isn't the only thing Kid is. She's also a clone of Shala that she herself created. giving her the amulet that she uses to time travel. I guess she has an intuitive knowledge of what needs to be done because she manages to save Surge, not from the Panther Demon thing. That happened when Surge was 6. When Surge was 10, he was almost drowned, and he was supposed to die. Lynx and Fate wanted him to die because if he dies, then the Prometheus circuit that unlocks only for Surge would unlock on the condition that he was dead, which feels like a minor oversight on Lucas' part. It turns out that Kid is the one who saved him, and because he was supposed to die, that world fragmented into the 2 dimensions we know as Homeworld and another world. There will be a quiz, by the way. I hope you're paying attention. Homeworld was never supposed to be a world, so it's doomed. That's why the Sea of Eden is actually the Dead Sea when you're in Homeworld, because Chronopolis will reflect whatever future is in store for the world, which again feels like a minor architectural oversight. As far as I can tell, thanks to the dedicated fans over at Chrono Compendium, is that the Homeworld is doomed to destruction because the so-called counter-time experiment taking place at Chronopolis, meant to control the flow of time itself, resulted in multiple time periods and locations occupying the same space-time and causing a singularity, which might be why the Dead Sea looks like it's melting into itself. And presumably, when the world was split into Homeworld and another world, a version of Chrono was created who never went to fight Lavos in 1999, which meant the world was never saved. So in the beginning, when Karsh and the Seasoning Lads try to apprehend Surge for the crime of being a ghost, it was actually because they were under orders from Lynx, who was back at Viper Manor, who wanted Surge in order to switch bodies with him using a treasure called the Dragon's Tear, which we briefly mistook for the Frozen Flame. Lynx had been politically manipulating the Dragoons in order to take control of a large enough force to help him find Surge, and the reason he needed to switch bodies is because in order to access the Frozen Flame, he'd have to be genetically identical to the only person who can access the Frozen Flame. That's Surge, by the way. Surge barges into Fate's bedroom and murders Fate, but that's a good thing because Fate is the bad guy, right? Right? No, not really. Fate was the only thing keeping the shattering remnants of the Dragon God from reforming and establishing a reptite supremacist society. So with the failsafe undone, the remains of Dinopolis are pulled from the ocean and begin floating through the air, forming Terra Tower. Oh yeah, Harl, by the way, she's actually an aspect of the dragons the same way that Lynx is to Fate, and she's been whispering sweet nothings into Lynx's ear, waiting for the right time to seize that sweet frozen flame for her dragon buddies, which she does. Sometimes when you replay an old game, you pick up on things you didn't notice last time. Playing through Chrono Cross, I noticed pervasive themes of lineage and self-identity, breaking away from one's parents, whether they've done good or bad, and adopting an identity separate from them. Fargo abandoned his son Nicky at a young age. Nicky was defined by this, becoming a creative, energetic individual driven to have his voice heard, so that others who suffered as he did might understand. You're not alone. Garai was a proud dragoon, a defender of the weak. When Radius, corrupted by the Masamune, killed Garai in a fit of jealous rage, Garai's spirit twisted and became demonic. His son Dario came into possession of that very sword. His mind was twisted by the same evil that cursed his father. Go is a painter whose wife died many years ago. His son Van was forced to live in poverty as his father's obsession with artistic perfection overshadowed his need to make a living. Van grew up hardworking, scrimping, saving, unable to understand his father's pride. That is until he meets the alternate world's Go. This version of his father became obsessed with money, using Van's well-being as an excuse, going on business trips, discouraging Van from painting, dealing with bad actors to make an extra buck. This Go made Van appreciate those qualities in his father he was so obsessed with running from. Chrono Trigger is like a valiant knight. He slays dragons, he rescues cats from trees. He's a living legend. One day, he has a son. The son's name is Chrono Cross. From his earliest memories, Chrono Cross has been walking in the shadow of his father. Other games would come up to him and say, "Hey Cross, how's your dad doing? You planning on taking over the family business soon?" "Hey, me and your old man go way back." "You got a lot to live up to, big guy." Then one day, Cross just takes a bus to South America, and he stays there for 5 years, drinking ayahuasca and learning to play the theremin. Everybody back home writes him off, but one day, he returns. He's different. He smells weird. He walks around town playing a ukulele, and he talks about the sun a lot. But for some reason or another, you decide to hang out with him. He says a lot of things on subjects he doesn't know much about, but you're too nice to tell him to shut up, so you just listen while saying things like, "Right. Uh-huh." Or, Oh, that's awesome, man. You realize that he's actually not a bad guy at all. He's got a good heart. He's a bit of an overthinker. His life plans are kind of ambitious, and he's a bit strange to fit in, but his heart's in the right place. But Cross starts getting fed up with being avoided. It's hard for him to make friends. He can't find a job. So he starts saying things like, "Hey, do you know who my old man is?" "Yup, that's me, Chrono Trigger's son." "Yes sirree, just a chip off the old block." "Hey dad, can you throw a good word in for me at the fish packing plant?" "Hey, maybe I can take over the family business someday." All Cross needed was a balance of qualities. It's good to find yourself. It's also good to learn something from somebody who's already been through what you're experiencing. Chrono Cross leans so hard in one direction that when it finally starts leaning in the other, it slingshots so hard that it almost invalidates its own identity. It serves to do nothing but answer 1,000 questions that you never even asked, while asking 1,000,000 questions that will never be answered. This is where Chrono Trigger fans are often lost. The connections to Trigger are shoehorned in. They make very little sense, and each subsequent connection to that world requires a new time travel / dimension travel / inexplicable plot device to make sense. It's like a Subway sandwich with 800 tomatoes on it. Yeah, it's being held together, for now, but all it'll take is the slightest breeze for it to crumble, and frankly, it doesn't even look that appetizing anymore.
2 tomatoes. And some pickle.
Have to stop now.
I have deep respect for Chrono Cross's ambition. I want to make that clear. I'm actually fascinated by all of this metaphysical crap, I'm not even kidding. It has the bones of an intricate creation myth come to life. It hooks you with the limitless potential of these ideas, and then asks you to wait patiently as it explains everything to you. Like a pathological liar, when you ask it a question, it responds,
Actually, yeah, the reason that it's this way is because of some other completely insane thing that I'm coming up with on the spot.
It bites off more than it can chew. It's impatient with itself. It refuses to let answers bloom naturally, in a way that uses the video game medium to tell a story. But it's not that it can't. There are instances of outstanding storytelling throughout the game. Even the ending is quite good. Speaking of that, I guess we should get to the conclusion here. So, Surge battles the Dragon God. It's an excellent fight, one of the best fights in the game. The arena constantly changes to match the 6 domains of the dragons. And the boss's element type is always shifting, meaning your characters vary in their usefulness throughout the battle. The music is incredible and there's a lot of build up to this point. It's not super difficult, but it is a battle of attrition. After the fight, you can find the Chrono Cross itself by combining the Shattered Dragon Tear at an altar. It acts as an element, able to be slotted among your other ones. Finally, the game ends where the story really started, back at the beach. And I've got good news. The ghosts of Chrono Trigger's characters are waiting there for you to give you more context. To be fair, I actually covered most of what they have to say earlier. So the final boss is the Time Devourer. It's an epic scene, you gotta give it that. There's no music, it's just apocalypse sounds. Shala is imprisoned in a crystal on its back. Now, if you just fight and kill it normally, you can get one of several different endings, depending on how quickly you rushed in and killed it. Most of these are only available on a New Game Plus save file. However, if you use all 6 elements of a different color, in a specific order, and then use the Chrono Cross element, you get the true ending. Not only is the Time Devourer destroyed, but Shala is freed. The split dimensions reunite, Shala and Kid become one person again. Surge ponders the meaning of life before waking up on the beach, having just collected 3 squint feathers for the village maiden. His memory is erased, and he can finally go back and live the life he was meant to live all along. The credits roll, and Kid resolves to find us, sometime, somewhere. It's a very good ending to a very good game that has its issues. It's beautiful to look at, the soundtrack is incredible. There were ambitious decisions made that pissed a lot of people off, but if not pissing people off is stifling your creativity, then it might be worth doing sometimes. The story is a beautiful catastrophe, a mess of characters speaking in strange accents, trying to understand their place in a fractured world, and a team of writers trying to understand Chrono Cross's place in Chrono Trigger's world. Just wish they could have figured it out before the game was released. Is the game worth playing? Probably absolutely. But before I answer that, let's talk about this Radical Dreamers edition of the game. If I had to pick one word to describe this remaster, if you can call it that, it would probably be lazy. It's far from the worst remaster I've ever played, but there are some massive oversights here. First of all, I find it hilarious that Square Enix keeps releasing these games with a beat the game button and claiming that it's a feature. It's not. And if you plan on using that automatic level up thing, I say just watch somebody play the game on YouTube, skip through the battles. You're getting largely the same experience. That's pretty much it for additional gameplay features, although there's a slow down and fast forward button, those already exist in the base game. You just have to wait till New Game Plus. If you're bothered by some of the slow battles in these RPGs, you'll probably be glad it's there though. There's a menu that allows you to pick resolution, and you can play the game in hideous widescreen if you're so inclined. You can also switch between the old and new graphics. The new graphics are pretty limited, so the big thing is the new character portraits. I think this is going to be a point of contention with old Cross fans. I found myself vastly preferring the old style at first, but eventually the new ones did start growing on me. The style fits more with the vibrant tropical theme. However, these new portraits vary massively in quality. I think some portraits like Snef, Orla, and Viper are big improvements. The majority of portraits don't look overly different than the old ones, sacrificing details for greater visual clarity, and some of them just look terrible. I'm astonished by how bad these Dark Surge portraits look, straight out of one of those Scholastic Book Order how to draw anime guides. Fungi kinda looks creepier to me now, but I guess that might be a good thing if you like creepy mushroom men. I don't think I'm crazy with the new Norris either. Before he looked boyish but distinguished, now he just looks a little pouty. Regardless of how you feel, you can switch them on and off, so that's always nice. Now, the backgrounds have been cleaned up, and I did make big finger quotes there when I said that. What this really means is they've been run through one of those AI filter programs that tries to iron out the artifacts a little bit. Some of the scenes look okay, and if you're being really charitable, you could say they have a watercolor look. Others are just messy, with lots of lost details. Unfortunately, without the filter, the pre-rendered backgrounds look pretty rough with a high-resolution monitor or TV, so again, I think it'll be up to you to decide what looks better. It's too bad all of these assets for these old games are long gone. It would be awesome to see the original backgrounds rendered at a high resolution. But since this is the best we'll get, is it better than emulating? I don't really know, because I'm pretty sure the game does run on a proprietary emulator. That's the only way to explain how bad the FPS is. I foolishly went into this $20 commercial product that was made 22 years ago expecting 60 frames per second. Sadly, you're getting the PS1 experience, beat for beat. Battles can run hilariously slow when there's multiple enemies on screen. There's absolutely no excuse for that. Also, the full motion videos run at their original low resolution, so they look awful stretched across a large screen. I'd say the closest thing to an objective improvement is the character models, which have had their textures cleaned up and a slight increase in the poly count by the looks of it. Also, they claim that the classic mode graphics are all original, but that's not the original font. The original font might actually have looked decent here. This one looks like Arial expanded in Microsoft Paint. Then there's the inclusion of Radical Dreamers. So this was a visual novel that originally came out on the Satellaview, which was a Super Nintendo add-on that launched in Japan only. There's been a fan translation of this game that you can find in ROM format, and though it was very good, I think the official release does a slightly better job of handling prose. I think this is going to be a matter of preference though, and the translation does a more than respectable job of staying true to the source material, which is a judgment I can only make now that I've played both. I wouldn't consider Radical Dreamers a necessary inclusion or a must-play, even if you are a big Chrono Cross fan, but it is worth checking out. It ties some things together between Trigger and Cross, adds a little bit of context to Cross's development, and there's some really awesome 16-bit interpretations of Cross's soundtrack as well. I played through the new version on my channel without commentary, so if you're interested, you can check that out. $20 isn't a lot to ask, but Radical Dreamers doesn't do much to sell itself. If you're a longtime fan looking for a convenient way to experience the game, I guess you could do worse. The problem is that if this game doesn't sell well, Square Enix will just say, well, guess nobody's interested in another Chrono game. We'll close the book on that one for the next 20 years. When in reality, it's their bare minimum approach that's holding everything back. There were so many things that they could have cleaned up, little quality of life additions, or the FPS bumped up at a bare minimum. It's not the worst remaster, it's not even the worst Square Enix remaster, but as I said, it's very lazy. They think we'll cough up the cash because $20 isn't that much, therefore it doesn't matter that this remaster of a very emulatable game, just saying, isn't up to snuff. I think it matters greatly, and I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to hold on to your money out of principle. So that's it for this video. I appreciate you sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed it, I kindly request that you like and or subscribe.